The French, too, had a plan, simple and to the point.
Whatever the circumstances, it is the commander-in-chief's intention to advance. All forces united to the attack of the German armies.
Whatever the circumstance, the French army would advance. Whatever the circumstance, in full strength. Whatever the circumstance, through the lost provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, on to the Rhine. Whatever the circumstance, the pride of France would march on. The French infantry would march still dressed in the red uniforms of 50 years before. Amid the uniforms of old France was a touch of Africa, Zouaves from Algeria and Morocco, and the famous French Foreign Legion. The cavalry, too, would advance, still wearing uniforms worn at Waterloo, but eager to charge and slash the German enemy. With uniforms drawn from history and ideas drawn from fiction, the army was up to date in one respect. It had the finest field gun in the world, the 75 millimeter. Flexible and mobile, it was capable of firing 25 rounds per minute, and the French army had them in great numbers. Europe's two greatest powers were set to collide. The French War Plan 17 was first put to the test on August 6th, when General Bonneu's 7th Corps advanced into the Green Mountains of Upper Alsace. The French army was able to retake Mulhausen, and for the first time in 44 years, it once again became Mulhouse. Bonneau was soon obliged by German troops from Strasbourg to retire in disorder, and Mulhouse was once again Mulhausen.
The French retreated in such a haste that we actually had to run after them. At first we found heaps of French army blankets, which the soldiers had thrown away. Then we found French greatcoats. Then we found French knapsacks. Then we found French belts with ammunition pouches full of cartridges. And finally, in barns hidden or sitting just on the roadside, the exhausted French soldiers.
On August 14th, Joffre ordered the army of Alsace under General Paul to try again. Once again, Mulhausen became a French city, but in a matter of hours reverted to its German name. As threats to the Allied left and center developed, Joffre had to withdraw Pau's formations for use elsewhere along the front. Mulhausen would remain in German hands for the foreseeable future. These opening moves left the French with only a small corner of Alsace in the eastern foothills of the Vosges. The principal thrust into Lorraine by Duval's First Army and de Castelnaud's Second Army also began on August 14th. The French advanced as liberators and not conquerors. The thought that the Germans might have plans of their own appears not to have crossed anyone's mind in the French High Command. Schlieffen had intended for the German left-wing armies to give ground, enticing the French forces away from the decisive right wing. For 4 days, the Germans fell back, contesting but not firmly opposing the French advance. Then the front lost its sponginess. The French infantry found German resistance stiffening. The French First Army was not firmly in contact with the Second, west of the Saar Valley. Duval and de Castelnau were not in operational touch at all. Duval was conscious of the weakness and intended on August 20th to mend it by launching an attack that would both restore contact and open a way through Connaught's cavalry corps to debouch into the enemy's rear. But as he set the attack in motion on the night of August 19th, the Germans were preparing to unleash their planned counteroffensive. Luck fell on the German side. The armies of Ruprecht and Heeringen had been temporarily subordinated to a single staff. Thus, while the French Second and First Armies coordinated their actions only as well as sporadic telephoning could arrange, the German 6th and 7th fought as a single entity. Duval's night attack was checked as soon as it began. The setback was followed by a simultaneous offensive along the whole line of battle by 8 German corps against the French 6. So it was that the commands on both sides entered into a zone of uncertainty. The test soon became a test of nerves in which Germany was at a disadvantage. The man in charge of the Kaiser's vast army was a man of unsteady nerves. General von Moltke was a cultured, thoughtful, reasonable man, but he was also a sick one and an uncertain man. Now, as the French were about to advance once again into Alsace and to launch a grand all-out offensive into Lorraine, von Moltke's indecisions grew upon him. The ambitions of other generals also came into play. When Crown Prince Rupert of Bavaria proposed a counterstrike by his 6th Army and von Heeringen's 7th Army, Moltke, seduced by the prospect of enveloping both French flanks, let them proceed. The subsequent actions at Cherbourg and Morhange on August 29th rapidly revealed that for the French infantry, offensive spirit would not by itself triumph over modern artillery and machine guns. The French, suffering enormous losses, were pushed back on their own frontier fortifications. Here, however, they mustered sufficient strength and resolve to organize a successful defense of Nancy and the Moselle line. The modifications to their original plan had not enabled the Germans to deal the French right a mortal blow. And as the fighting in this region became less intense, Joffre could again transfer troops to buttress the Allied center and the left. On the other hand, having vastly underestimated the extent to which the Germans would use reservists, and still unaware of the real width of the German drive through Belgium, Joffre misjudged the strength of the German center. Ordered to advance northeast into the Ardennes, Ruffery's 3rd Army and de Langle de Cary's 4th Army blundered into German forces around Neufchâteau and Virton on August 21st and 22nd, and were bloodily repulsed.
We were shot down like rabbits, because for them it was a real target, because we had red trousers, and they were down in the hole themselves. Then we had to retreat, of course. We lie down for a certain while, try to make some holes, and after that, when we could do nothing, we had to retreat back.
If the French plan seemed to be thrown into a cocked hat, Moltke's overall handling of German operations was even less certain than that of the French. On August 17th, he made a misguided effort to improve the coordination of the German right wing, placing Kluck under the orders of the more cautious Bülow. This irritated the pugnacious Kluck and also inhibited him from swinging the first. By the 19th, the true scale of German strength and movement began to dawn upon Lanrezac, the French 5th Army commander. As he approached the Sambre and Meuse between Charleroi and Givet, he found the German 2nd and 3rd Armies advancing towards him from the north and east through Belgium. His warning caused some at French General Headquarters to brand him a defeatist. But as Bülow's forces crossed the Sambre on August 21st, and the French counterattack failed on the 22nd, all hopes of a French offensive to the northeast evaporated. On August 22nd, displaying untypical impetuosity, and without waiting for Hausen's 3rd Army, Bülow pressed the French back an additional 5 miles. This counteracted the planned effect of Hausen's Musée crossing on August 23rd. With the French 5th Army farther south, it was correspondingly harder to attack its rear. Even so, when Hausen appeared on his right, Lanrezac felt that he must act immediately to avert disaster. By the time Lanrezac realized the danger he was in, the British Expeditionary Force, under Field Marshal Sir John French, had reached the Maubeuge-les-Cateaux area on the Allied left.
The BEF, small of a contingent as it was and present in France at the time, was a professional army. They were disciplined. They were great shots. Their officers were, top notch, and they put a hurting on the Germans at Mons.
For once in British history, an army was taking to the field with great efficiency. 1,800 special trains had carried them to their ports of embarkation. On one day alone, 80 trains ran into Southampton docks. An average of 50,000 tons of shipping per day, safe and unhindered under the protection of the Royal Navy, carried the expeditionary force to France. Landings in France began in deep secrecy on August 7th. Each day, the Royal Flying Corps would fly its recon. Some flights would find nothing, but one scouting over the old battlefield of Waterloo was more fortunate.
We found the whole area completely covered with hordes of field grey uniforms and heavy stuff, transport, guns, and what have you, coming towards us. In fact, it looked as though the place was alive with the Germans.
Returning to base, the pilot was rushed off to Sir John French to tell him what he had seen.
And I showed him a map all marked out. He said, "Have you been over that area?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I explained what I'd seen, and they were enormously interested, and then they began reading the figures that I'd estimated, whereupon I seemed to feel that their interest faded. They seemed to look at each other and shrug their shoulders, and then French turned round to me and said, "Now, yes, my boy, this is terribly interesting, but tell me all about an airplane."
Those who were pushing for the use of aircraft, the very early airmen, as it were, they saw tremendous potential for the aircraft as not just an observation, artillery spotting kind of task, which is what most of the generals saw it as. And they complained over and over again that the ground generals simply didn't understand what this machine could do for them, and were wasting it, using it simply for observation or for reconnaissance or for photographing or whatever they were using it for, and that it could be an offensive weapon.
Despite his exposed position and the onrushing German army, Sir John promised to cover Lamberzac's left by standing at Mons for 24 hours. There would be no grand offensive. The British army was digging in. Second Corps manned the line on the Mons-Conde Canal and a small salient around the town, while Lieutenant General Sir Douglas Haig's First Corps was to its right. For a time, Kluck was ignorant of the British deployment across his axis of advance. During the misty morning of Sunday, August 23rd, Kluck's leading corps ran headlong into the BEF position.
Quite suddenly, out of the blue, we saw cavalry coming towards us. They'd come out of the right on our right flank. I said, "Good gracious, it's Germans." So we immediately started to fire.
By 9 o'clock, both sides were having at it. The Germans made a succession of piecemeal, badly coordinated assaults against Smith-Dorrien's position in the salient and along the canal. The British quickly became acquainted with the power and accuracy of German artillery.
We were in the trenches waiting for them, but we didn't expect anything like the smashing blow that struck us. All at once the sky began to rain down bullets and shells. I saw shells bursting to right and left of me, and I saw many a good comrade go out.
Then German infantry came forward in solid square blocks, surging towards the canal and its crossing. The BEF's incomparable musketry roared to life, exacting a terrible toll from the dense German formations.
They were in solid square blocks, standing out sharply against the skyline, and you couldn't help hitting them. We lay in our trenches with not a sound or sign. They crept nearer and nearer, and then our officers gave the word. The Germans seemed to stagger like a drunk man suddenly hit between the eyes, after which they made a run for us, shouting some outlandish cry that we couldn't make out.
Poor devils of infantry. They advanced in companies of quite 150 men in files 5 deep. The first company was simply blasted away to heaven by a volley at 700 yards. And in their insane formation, every bullet was almost sure to find 2 billets. They had absolutely no chance.
This was a mad minute. 15 rounds of aimed rifle fire that the British infantry alone was trained to do. At Mons, it did the trick. The Germans were shot flat.
Our first battle is a heavy, an unheard of heavy defeat. and against the English. The English we laughed at.
Well entrenched and completely hidden, the enemy opened up a murderous fire. The casualties increased and the rushes became shorter. With bloody losses, the attack came to an end. It was all to no avail. On the left flank, German pressure began to build. The French Fifth Army was falling back, exposing the British flanks. Although Haig's First Corps was not heavily pressed, Smith-Dorrien's troops largely held on until late in the afternoon, when relentless German pressure and numerical superiority finally broke the Tommies. Orders were issued to fall back. The retreat from Mons had begun.
We were very disappointed when we got the order that we have to break off battle and retreat. To do this is not an easy thing. It's quite easy to join battle, but it's not easy to break it off. However, we put down a curtain fire between us and the Germans, which enabled the infantry and cavalry to get away.
After all the tricks of the trade from their experience of small wars, the English veterans brilliantly understood how to slip off at the last moment.
Accordingly, First Corps fell back about 2 miles to pre-selected positions. The BEF had performed well on its first important battle, keeping Kluck's First Army at bay for the best part of the day. Most of the British 1,600 casualties were in Second Corps. On came the Germans. The Schlieffen Plan was still on time and target. That night, the threat to the French Fifth Army's right near Dinant prompted Lanrezac to withdraw without consulting Joffre or the British. The BEF had no alternative but to conform to Lanrezac. The whole Allied line was in retreat, and thousands of frightened homeless people joined the armies on the roads west.
Up to your waist in water, up to your eyes in sludge, using the kind of language that makes the sergeant blush. Who wouldn't join the army? That's what we all inquire. Don't we picture the poor civilian sitting around the fire? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. It's a lovely war. Who wouldn't be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pain. As soon as Reveille is gone, we feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up to the sergeant brings a breakfast up to bed. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want? With eggs and ham, when we got plum and apple jam. Oh, boys, right, son, how will we spend the money we earn? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, what will be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pay. As soon as the valley is gone, we feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up to the sergeant brings our breakfast up to bed. What? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want with eggs and ham when we got plum and apple jam? For us, retard, we spend the money we earn. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.